welcome back, or welcome to the Europa Saal. I'm very excited to see so many people here in the audience. Joining me on stage are Graham Stewart, the Minister of State for Energy Security and Net Zero for the UK, and the co-chair of the Powering Past Coal Alliance, Eva Petrova, the Deputy Minister of Energy for the Republic of Bulgaria, and Joe Tyndall, the Director of the Environment Directorate for the OECD. Thank you so much for joining me here today. It's such a pleasure to have you all here. I'd like to start out, since we have so many of you here in the audience, I'd love if you could pull out your devices. We want to make sure that, as our keynote speaker said earlier today, that this is a dialogue and this is your chance to help influence what we talk about here up on stage. So go ahead and scan that QR code, choose Europa Saal, and this is the question that you're going to see there. In the next 6 years, which of the following measures will be the most decisive in facilitating the coal to clean transition? In just a moment, you'll get the options. You can probably see them already on your phones. Will it be government policies and regulation, setting national targets and implementing phase-out plans, transition support for coal-dependent communities, international cooperation, stop public and private funding for coal, or more investment in renewables? Go ahead and make those choices. We will come back to touch upon this question later on, but right now I want to go into our first round of targeted questions from my panelists. In this first round, I'll ask you to keep your answers to 2.5 minutes each. We'll start with you, Graham Stewart, of the UK and of the PPCA. So, the Powering Past Coal Alliance was launched in 2017 at COP23 and was initiated by the UK and Canada with the plan to advance the transition away from coal power across the world. As co-chair of the Powering Past Coal Alliance, how do you see the PPCA evolving in its influence and impact on the global coal phase-out? And what lessons can the rest of us draw from the UK's own experience?
Well, thank you for that question, and good morning, everybody. It's great to see so many people in here focused on coal, because phasing out unabated coal is one of the biggest challenges we face in meeting the net zero challenge. Coal-fired generation is the single biggest source of global emissions, the biggest single source, accounting for more than a third of global power output, and therefore must be consigned to history if we are to reach net zero. More worrying still than that bold statistic is the fact that coal-fired generation isn't shrinking globally, it's still growing. So we need to do more to inspire action. In the UK, we are trying to lead by example, because just 12 years ago, in 2012, nearly 40% of UK electricity generation came from coal. The last plant will shut in September, and I'm looking forward to attending and kissing goodbye. We started the Industrial Revolution in the UK, and coal drove it. But the last, coal-generating plant will shut this year. Thank you. And how have we managed to do that? Well, we've brought about by a rapid deployment of new renewable generation and a renaissance of nuclear power. We've incentivized renewable generation through the Contracts for Difference kind of auction mechanism, which is now largely followed by a lot of other countries around the world, and by bringing in a carbon price floor so that coal is priced out of the market. And that's the change, I think, which has been fundamental to the UK becoming the first major economy, the first G20 economy on Earth to halve its emissions. And we had those official statistics a few weeks ago showing that we've met our third carbon budget and have now halved our emissions. So we're back per capita roughly to around 1850. But of course, we still have a long way to go. The Powering Past Coal Alliance, which has been said we co-chair with Canada, welcomed 15 new members last year. So I remember in the autumn we had Colombia, which is of course a major coal nation, and Panama joining. Then at COP28, the UAE, president of the COP, joined the PPCA, and so did the United States of America. So PPCA membership now covers a third of the world's nations, including this year's COP president, Azerbaijan. And I certainly hope that all future COP presidencies will join the PPCA. And we need to support nations of all sizes and wealth to phase out their reliance on coal. And that's why I've been so pleased to see the growth of membership to 180 members, not all of them nations, and the PPCA can offer unparalleled support to anyone who commits to phasing out coal, including advice on how to create the right financial environment. And by convening each of our individual national experiences and sharing it with others, we can provide expertise to inform people on that pathway and help accelerate the early retirement of existing coal fleets, as well as scaling up clean power in order to balance that out. So that's enough from me. I'm sure I've exceeded my 2.5 minutes, but we're very excited about this. I say it's the biggest single area of emissions, so stopping any new coal generation is target one, and then helping, supporting, and providing the fiscal and regulatory context to get rid of unabated power that's already in existence is stage 2. But we're making progress. We need to go further and faster.
Thank you so much, Graham Stewart. Yes, making progress and need to go further. I'd like to go now to Eva Petrova. We just heard great news from the UK, from the PPCA, and I'd also like to mention yesterday on a panel, we heard from the Czech Republic and from Moldova about their transitions away from coal. Can you tell us a bit about what the current state of affairs is in Bulgaria regarding your coal phase-out, and what are the primary obstacles that are keeping Bulgaria from transitioning fully away from coal?
Thank you. That's really an interesting question.
A little bit closer.
A little bit, okay, thank you. So really a pleasure to be here today. We all are committed, of course, to ambitious decarbonization targets that will require massive deployment of renewables, but also innovative solutions and technologies, as well as really in-depth economic transformation in parallel to the energy and coal phase-out processes. Bulgaria is consistent on its choice on the transition path forward.
Can I invite you to speak right into the microphone?
Okay, thank you.
Yes, that's great.
Bulgaria is consistent on its choice on the decarbonization solution and coal phase-out. We are committed to rely on the local renewable sources like wind, solar, hydro as well, and geothermal in the longer perspective, while at the same time continue to operate under the strictest safety conditions, the existing nuclear capacities, and adding new ones. While in parallel we work on the lignite coal phase-out in our case. At the same time, we put a constant effort on diversification, both on nuclear fuel, but also gas supplies. That's priority number one as well for us. And in the same time, we develop the networks in terms of capacities, but also digitalization as well as interconnectivity with all our neighbors. Where we are, we recently completed system modeling based on which we updated our national energy and climate plan, and we submitted an updated coal phase-out roadmap to the National Assembly. Basically, how we see it that in the very short term, by 2026, we continue to rely on the existing capacities. Then in the midterm, by 2030, coal is gradually pushed out by renewables. Also pump hydro storage capacities existing and new ones introduced in the system, and nuclear in the longer run. The model provides for coal phase out under different security and geopolitical scenarios in order to give as a result also a way to guarantee the system resilience and security, and to incorporate the new generation mix in a system in a way to limit the participation of conventional generators into providing this system security. What are the challenges? Of course, as Mr. Minister mentioned, the challenge is the scale. For example, in the case of Bulgaria, we have 3 coal regions, and if you look at the largest one, that is Maritsa East region, it is dominated by a coal mine that is one of the largest in Europe and 5th by production capacity, and thermal power plants that last year, in 2023, they provided more than 26% of the electricity output in the country. The second challenge, what we see, is actually that while we talk about transition and coal phase out as undoubted strategic choice, actually we need tailored solutions because the realities are quite different. Even just for the example, in the case of Bulgaria, we have Stara Zagora, where we need to phase out coal from electricity generation, while in other coal region, that is Pernik, we have to phase out coal from a district heating. And it's a huge social issue because actually that's the region where you have the largest number of domestic users of district heating service. Also, we are talking about quite different regions. Stara Zagora is second region after the capital Sofia in terms of standards and in terms of salaries, while, for example, the other coal region, Kyustendil, is one of the poorest regions, and there you already see the population processes. So it's quite a diversified challenges and solutions that are needed. And just to conclude, the challenges of coal phase-out and transition are one side of the story. The other side is the actual economic transformation that should go in parallel, and we need to collaborate regionally in order to face these challenges. It always goes beyond individual states. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eva Petrova. I want to talk a little bit about that in our second round of questions. For now, I'd like to move to Joe Tyndall of the OECD. What are some of the finance mechanisms currently in place to provide aid to coal-intensive economies as they're transitioning away from coal?
Well, the good news is there are some current financial mechanisms. As we've already heard, we're trying to deal with a two-phase problem. One dealing with existing assets and the other one stopping investment into new coal assets. So I thought I'd look very quickly at early retirement. So the shutting down and repurposing of existing assets, and often those contain a public funding component, for example, involving multilateral development banks. Two well-known examples are the JETPs, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, which we'll probably hear a little bit more about, and the Asian Development Bank's Energy Transition Mechanism. So I just thought I'd recap what the ETM is about. It consists of two funds, financed by governments, MDBs, private investors, and philanthropies. And the idea is to use these funds to buy legacy coal power plants and retire or repurpose them within 15 years. And at the same time, the proceeds from the asset sale go towards renewable energy plants and also for the enabling infrastructure, like grids and storage that sits around it. There are also a number of initiatives out there to focus specifically on how to crowd in private investors, because we know private investment is going to be absolutely critical to achieving this coal phase out for both early retirement and for transitioning away from coal investments in the future. And GFANZ is a big player here. Also, the Rocky Mountain Institute has some useful publications, for example, on metrics for early coal retirement. The last point I wanted to touch on quickly is the OECD's involvement in the Coal Transition Accelerator. This is a more recent initiative combining work on the public and private side of the equation. Launched by France and the US at COP28, it broadly aims to accelerate that transition away from coal by doing three things. One, helping reduce the cost of capital of renewable energy in EMDEs. Second, accelerating the implementation of the JETPs, and third, supporting the private sector on their coal phase-out ambitions. The OECD was asked to provide guidance on that last point, quite specifically by developing a gold standard, so-called, for financial institutions which currently don't have clear guidelines on how to go about this. So guidelines outlining what a robust financing policy or strategy for transitioning away from coal could look like for those financial institutions. And we hope that's really going to help move things forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joe Tyndall. Before we go to our second round of questions, and I'm happy you brought up JETPs and waited because I'd love to talk with you about them in a moment, I'd like to see what all of you here in the Europasaal had to say about transitioning away from coal. If we can bring up those Slido results, let's take a look at those. The question was, in the next 6 years, which of the following measures will be the most decisive in facilitating the coal to clean transition? Coming in at 34% of you, setting national targets and implementing phase-out plans. 22% said more investment in renewables, 19% stopping public and private funding for coal. Government policies and regulations had about 13% of you, and 9% of you transition support for coal-dependent communities, and it looks like maybe 4% talked about international cooperation. International cooperation, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but right now I'd like to go to Graham Stewart to talk about these JETPs. We heard a little bit about them yesterday. For those of you, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships. The UK has really championed JETPs. Can you tell us a little bit more about what they are and touch on what role they play in facilitating the transition away from coal, particularly in coal-intensive economies? And within this, what kind of a role do you see for private finance?
Well, thank you for your question. Every country is different, so I mean, that's one of the reasons for having these just energy transition partnerships. We've got to support communities, as we've just discussed from the Minister from Bulgaria. There are very particular different provinces in the same country can be in a very different economic and social situation. So the just energy transition partnerships aim to bring together partner governments in emerging economies with the multilateral development banks, with the development finance institutions, philanthropies, and the private sector in order to mobilize the finance needed to transition away from coal. And JETPs aim to pilot, if you like, a more catalytic model, absolutely focused on country, very much driven by that nation, but with the international partnership. We have a kind of international partners group of countries to support those JETPs. And we have JETPs so far with Indonesia, which I think is around $20 billion from memory. Vietnam is around 15, South Africa and Senegal, each of which we are seeking to help, and by demonstrating how they can accelerate their transition, create templates for others. In the UK's case, we're backing that with $350 million contribution to the Climate Investment Funds, the CIFs, as well as support to initiatives such as the World Bank's Energy Sector Management Assistance Programme. But we know, as has already been touched on by Joe, that the finance required to phase out coal isn't sufficient. And so we are committing to further work in that area and looking to do more public-private collaboration. That includes, as Joe mentioned, working with the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANS. It's also why we're supporting the French-led initiative, I think that started last year, the Coal Transition Accelerator, or CTA, which will make policy recommendations to ensure a swift transition from coal power can be effectively financed, and for which the PPCA is hosting the Secretariat. And in order, because finance is absolutely key to this, so it's trying to capture some of the carbon funds in all those ways and then allow that to come in, because if we close down existing coal plants, clearly we are making a big carbon saving. So it's trying to get the alignment right so that that funding can flow and you can buy out these assets. And as Joe suggested, may even be able to get a surplus from that, which could be channeled into other things such as renewables. So the PPCA is refreshing its finance principles 5 years on, further to help that. And they will provide a blueprint for financial institution members to support the goals of the PPCA and give effect to the 2030 phase out of all unabated coal for OECD members, which is the PPCA target, and 2040 for others, and that's enshrined in the PPCA declaration. So that's very much what we're focused on, and because it can be done, but it is about getting the wiring. So you get lost in an alphabet soup of acronyms and initiatives, but in truth it is complicated, and pulling all these pieces together, if you do it well and you do it with a focus nation by nation and recognizing the particularities of each, then I believe we can go further and faster. And the more we demonstrate it in country, reassure those who own the existing assets that they will be fairly treated, as well as reassuring the communities who are employed by them, then we can move more quickly and fulfill that declaration of the PPCA.
Thank you so much, Graham Stewart. A one-size-fits-all approach, as we also heard yesterday from Germany's foreign minister, isn't the way to go. And really, we have to look state by state. And now I want to come to Bulgaria with another one of these acronyms, the JTF, the Just Transition Fund. So Bulgaria is set to receive, I think, 1.2 billion from the Just Transition Fund, 1.2 billion euros. And how do you anticipate Bulgaria's territorial just transition plan will facilitate the shift away from coal? And please be sure, we want to make sure forever that we can get that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, the JTF is allocating some 2 billion euros for the coal phase-out support. We just completed our plans, how we will use the funds available. They were approved 10th of 2023. It's the support is targeted under three pillars. The first pillar is sustainable energy solutions, namely support the renewables. Geothermal is a special focus also in case of Bulgaria. Of course, storage capacities and clean hydrogen. The second pillar is the social pillar. With the social pillar, we are targeting reskilling and upskilling of the employed, plus energy efficiency and energy communities, because there is also a huge potential there from the point of view of demand transformation. And the third pillar is actually reshaping the regional economy. There the support is provided for adapting the existing businesses to the new environment, because more or less they were related with the coal industry so far, but also to set up new businesses, new industries, and also supporting the infrastructure in terms of industrial zones and business setups. Of course, one of the largest assets in the coal region is actually the land. Land reclamation seems to be a quite significant challenge from environmental point of view, but also from financial point of view, especially in the context of accelerated coal phase out. If you look at the accumulation of funds that are usually to be there, the acceleration of the coal phase out puts a pressure on funding the land reclamation. But another challenge is also repurposing of the land, upgrading the land with necessary infrastructure, with necessary measures, so it is suitable for the new economic setups in the region. That's for the JTF, but I would like to agree that actually if you look at the funding, it's quite insufficient. Insufficient in terms of amounts, yes, 2 billion under the JTF, but we recently opened a call for expression of interest for Stara Zagora region for investments, and we ended up with investment intentions for more than 10 billion. So it's quite a funding gap. We have another acronyms that could fill the gap, like RRF, Recovery and Resilience, like Modernization Fund, like Connecting Europe Facility when it comes to infrastructure, but still it is a gap. And here I would like to agree with the other speakers that actually the gap should be filled in, and it seems like the feasible way for private investment. So coal phase out and transition actually goes based on strong public-private partnerships in securing the funding and leveraging the public funds that are there. And shortage of funds also from our perspective is also time. You know, we need to act quick, but if you look at all of these funds like JTF, RRF and the others, they have like perspective 2026, maximum 2030. However, the investments that need to be implemented in the coal phase-out process, they have different time horizon, especially if you look, for example, in the social dimension. We can mobilize JTF funding for a quick start, reskilling and upskilling, but you need also a long-term work with the generations in order to adhere, in order to implement the transitions. And the other part of transformation like grids and demand, decarbonization of industry, transport, building sectors, you know, it's a long story. So
it is a long story.
Yeah.
I do wish that we had time to cover it all. We had great panels yesterday on upskilling and reskilling, also a fantastic panel on grids. For now, I'd like to go to Joe Tyndall. We've spoken a bit about finance, and you mentioned guidelines a little bit earlier, and I wonder if you can expand on that a bit, because we've seen that there is movement in entities such as insurance companies and pension funds and foundations and others to withdraw investments from coal worldwide. What's driven this kind of movement?
Okay, well, there has indeed been a bit of a transition, or started, but it's quite uneven. And there are a couple of things I want to highlight, developments I want to highlight, that might explain why it's happening in some areas. The two developments are assessing the financial materiality of climate risks, and secondly, the changing regulatory environment, which I know came up in the Slido poll. So when it comes to climate risk, there has been growing awareness that climate change can have financial impacts on companies and can endanger financial stability, but so far most financial institutions have not carried out proper climate risk assessments, although this is slowly changing. And to just give one example, back in 2022, S&P found that 26% of the financial institutions they assessed had policies in place that restricted financing for coal. Well, they also found out that those companies that do finance coal do not carry out climate risk assessments. So do those risk assessments. That'll change your financing investment decisions. At the same time, we know there's been quite a lot of progress in government regulation on net zero more broadly, and that has several implications. But one I wanted to just highlight is the impact on the cost of capital in different sectors. Oxford University did a study, for example, that shows how over the last 2 decades in Europe, the cost of capital for coal has increased, while it's been decreasing for renewables in regions where less net zero regulation is in place. In regions where there's less net zero regulation in place, the trend goes in the opposite direction. You're seeing more investment in coal. So that's 2 lessons to take out of it. The private sector is going to act when a risk is financially material and when regulation is pushing them to act. Those 2 things together, I think, are what needs to be done to strengthen. My last point is to note something we haven't really touched on, and that is the importance of disclosure, accountability, transparency, and all of these things using standards, including, for example, through the Coal Transition Accelerator that Graham also mentioned, essential to deal with this ongoing perception of greenwashing, which is really another hindrance to accelerating the transition away from coal.
Thank you so much, Jo Tyndall. I do kind of feel like our conversation is just getting started, and I wish that we could continue. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this panel discussion. I'd like to thank Graham Stewart from the UK and the PPCA, Eva Petrova from Bulgaria, and Jo Tyndall for the OECD. Let's have a great round of applause for our panelists today.